This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, an international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. To join our global community and access member-only webinars, events, a wide range of digital learning offerings, coaching and leadership resources, accreditation schemes, and more, you can find us at associationforcoaching.com. Hello and welcome to another episode in the series where we explore the conscience and consciousness of coaching. My name is George Warren. I'm your host, and I'm a coach, supervisor, and mentor coach. For today's episode, I'm really delighted to be joined by Tabitha Jayne. Tabitha is a professional coach based up in Scotland and also the lead coach and founder of Earthself. I first met Tabitha, our paths crossed when we both realized we had a big passion for coaching outdoors and really coaching with the natural world. So it was really good to get our conversation together for this podcast episode. We explore the benefits of time spent in nature and the power and potential of the natural world, the relationship between humans and nature. We look at neuroscience and how we can rewire our neural pathways and nature's role in that. We look at biases and how we can be better aware of them as humans and as coaches. We touch on mystical experience in the natural world and the power of memory. We also take a look at the systemic nature of coaching and have a go at redefining performance. And Tabitha and I both have a swing at defining spirituality and explore coaching as a spiritual tool. We also take a look at the current state of the coaching world and the ethics behind it at the moment and share some concerns about where it might be going and what we can do about it. So a beautiful and very wide-ranging conversation with Tabitha. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Here is Tabitha Jayne. Tabitha, welcome. How are you?
I'm really well and looking forward to the conversation, George, and excited to be here.
Thank you. Me too. So one thing I've known you for a while, and one of the things I admire about your work is really the intersection between coaching, the art and the science of coaching, but also nature and the love of nature. And I just wanted, if it was helpful, for you to say a bit about the work that you do for our listeners.
It's almost where to start. If I start with the journey on how I came to the science and art of coaching as well as nature. And my background is in psychology, George. And as part of that, I thought that I would go down the clinical psychology pathway. Ended up working in the local psychiatric hospital and found myself questioning, there has to be something better. This doesn't seem to be a very productive way of moving people forward. And by the time that I found coaching and experienced it myself, I think I moved forward I felt as if I'd moved forward more in 6 months than I'd moved forward in 5 years. And that was when the realisation kind of like hit me of, there's something in coaching. This is really powerful. I want to study it and I want to train it. And alongside that, in tandem, I've always had a love of nature and the natural world, which definitely came from my granny, although I didn't appreciate that until I was a lot older. And I found myself after the sudden death of my brother Peter when I was 22 and he was 17, going back and spending more time in nature. I didn't know what else to do to process the grief. And I think the only way to describe it is that something magical happened there. And I thought, why are we not talking more about this? And obviously we are now, but that combination of the coaching and also my own practice that I had of spending time in nature and reflecting in nature. And I would say I was going for a walk and then realised that my version of going for a walk in nature was very different to how other people described going for a walk. And that was really the start almost. It's been 12, 13 years ago I simultaneously started studying for my coaching certification at the same time that I started doing a master's in applied ecopsychology, which is looking at the relationship between humans and nature, and started weaving the two together from the get-go. knowing that coaching for me is far more powerful when you can weave in elements of engaging with nature, reflecting with nature, and gaining insight from nature and the implications from this. And since then, in the past 12 years, it's not just the practical experience and a belief. The evidence base is growing exponentially in terms of the impact that humans have upon us as individuals. And if coaching is about optimizing, and I prefer using the word optimizing rather than maximizing from the ICF coaching definition, because nature optimizes, it doesn't maximize. So if we want to optimize our full potential as humans, we need nature. The evidence is fundamentally clear. We need nature to optimize our full potential. So for me, there can be, as we move forward in coaching, no separation between coaching and nature. It needs to be intimately intertwined. And as we move forward with the increasing climate crisis and ecological breakdown, social breakdown, there is so much that stepping into a deeper relationship with nature can provide us. And coaching as an accompaniment for that it comes back to being one of the most powerful tools that I know for shifting and creating transformation. It really is just something incredible.
Thank you. And what does that deeper connection to nature look like?
That's a good question, and there's two ways of looking at it. I can speak about it personally, or I can speak about it from the evidence base. So let me weave both together into one. When we have a deeper relationship with the natural world, i.e. when we see ourselves as part of it, not separate from it, we are able to tap into different ways of thinking. We're able to gain insight and meaning. So take it as an example. I am down at the allotment and I love using the allotment as a metaphor. And I've just put in another flower bed. And I thought, God, this is good. I'm putting structure back into some aspects of my life, and I'm also putting structure in physically. So here's this reflection of what's happening in my life being mirrored by the tasks that I'm doing at the allotment. And that meaning that we create from the experiences that we have has the capacity to not just help us make better decisions, but just see the world completely differently and engage with it differently and recognise that, we're not just part of nature, we are Earth. And together, we're way more powerful when we work together in harmony. And I think that's the bit about a deeper relationship. We can get so caught up in, the fear, the doubt, the worry, the stress, the anxiety that seems to be the norm in our human world just now. And that fear, doubt, stress, anxiety doesn't actually exist in nature. There's a very different way of being. And that deeper connection allows us to let go of that stress, that fear, that doubt, that anxiety, and be able to hear the inner voice speak more clearly and with greater clarity, which I think is so powerful in terms of being able to know what you want to do and not doubt it. And I think that, that's what coaching is about as well. But for me, there is something, again, going back, because my allotment is the happy place that I'm spending a lot of time just now. And I was just down there the other night, and it's so beautiful because dusk is coming earlier and the sunlight falls or sets behind the mountains, and I have these beautiful hills just in front of me, and there is a sense of peace and tranquility and certainty that I find there that I don't find in other places. And that the more that I spend in that place of peace, the more I'm able to let it filter into other aspects of my life.
That's a beautiful image, Tabitha. And there's so much sparking for me hearing you speak. But it seems to be that a lot of what you're experience, but also the research that you're part of and the studying and academic work you've done suggests that the more that we allow nature and the outdoor world into our consciousness, the better it is for us.
Yes. And I mean, fundamentally, I know that you've had somebody talking about neuroscience on here. And if you look at some of the data that's coming out from neuroscience studies of what happens with the brain in nature, you're able to literally rewire neural patterns within the brain. That's really powerful when you think about, what you need to be able to do to adapt and respond to some of the current challenges that we face, both individually and collectively.
Mm. And I know it's a couple of masters you've taken, is that right?
Yes. The first one was more experiential and was the applied eco-psychology. And then the second one was, the official title was Consciousness, Spirituality and Transpersonal Psychology, which transpersonal psychology just means looking at a relationship with something more than a separate self, which makes, a relationship with Earth ideal to study in that context.
And maybe you could say a bit about your experience of that second master's and some of your key or more profound learnings or reflections from it.
It was really funny because when I finished my undergraduate degree back in 2006, I actually signed up for a master's in consciousness studies. And I never did it. I got accepted, but I never did it, George. And then I had this knowing that I needed to do another master's to kind of fill some of the academic gaps that I felt were missing. People like evidence bases, so let's make sure that what you're doing is robust, or that was my thinking anyway. And I had a conversation with Les, who is the programme director and the founding director of this master's, and it turns out that it was the same programme in evolved state that I was applying for further down the line. So it was really interesting that I'd kind of walked away once and come back to it. And Les had said to me, this is more appropriate for what you want to study now. And I have never stepped into a programme that was being created and felt that it was just designed specifically for me. From looking at consciousness to transpersonal or transformational leadership, and being really able to have the freedom and the flexibility to explore coaching in nature. I was able to step in and write some papers on that and really bring that love of the natural world into every single aspect of the course that I did. Was something that was truly special, and everything that I studied gave me a deeper understanding of the power and the potential of the natural world. And it also gave me the freedom to explore, research things that were important to me. My master's ended up being, I'd launched a programme called the Nature Process in 2014, and I interviewed participants from that programme as part of my master's research, and it was really wonderful to be able to go deeper into, well, what even is the distinction between nature and earth, and how do we perceive it? And I think the thing that still stands out to me from that research is that when you talk about nature, even if you feel part of nature, it's very interesting that most people will say that they see humans as separate from nature. But when you flip it and start talking about the earth, people will say, yes, we're definitely part of the earth. And as you ask them to go into their subjective experiences, they do perceive a difference between that connection to nature and that connection to earth. And I mean, this is still an emerging field of research. So it's early days, but and it's kind of a question for the listeners, isn't it? What is the difference between connecting to nature and connecting to earth for you, and how do you notice it? Because if the description in the academic literature is it's a subjective sense, it comes down to our own capacity for mindfulness in the natural world and the meaning that we're creating about our relationship as well with the natural world, that we can tune into it. But I do guarantee that if the listener sat there for a moment and thought, are you part of nature? Are you part of the earth? The answers would kind of follow some of that research. And I think that has just impacted me in so many different ways. You know, the models and the frameworks that I continue to even use when it comes to coaching and transformation have all come from that master's. And even being able to do the Elf Strength of the Earth project with Granny and step into a way to explore, can we actually create a connection to Earth online and be able to show and do that. And that was funding through a project that came from the Aleph Trust where I did the Masters, and having that support to be able to develop it and continue it and weave it in and really play with some interesting concepts, you know, of how do you bring in it's not even just a transpersonal of connecting people to the earth. How do you bring in the wisdom of the ancestors in ways that don't freak people out because they sound so strange to the Western world? And, you know, my granny isn't with us anymore. She died in 2018. And to be able to take a conversation that I'd spontaneously recorded on video that turned out to be the week before she died, George, to take that, to edit it, to then be able to weave that into a project and see the impact, because I didn't, it was really emotional for me. I didn't anticipate how people would respond to Granny, and I think she was the embodiment of what it meant for that connection to Earth, that even at 96, when she'd been housebound, she would still sit and look at the trees every day. You know, she'd find some way of connecting, but it was even there in her memories and how she talked about it, and to have those memories ingrained so deep that they were impacting and catalysing other people's memories and triggering a connection and helping people reflect on their own connection. It's kind of quite a humbling experience. If you think, I think there's an expression or there's a saying, and I don't know where it's from, but it's like a real master never shows you how powerful they are until the moment of their death. And that for me is Granny. She wouldn't have known the words consciousness, spirituality, even meditation. But, you know, when I was caring for her, she would sit in bed and go, oh, you know, when you've got that carousel in your head and you can't sleep and you just have to focus on breathing in and breathing out. And I'd be standing there going, my granny's been meditating for decades, but she doesn't know what meditating is. I mean, and I think that's you know, that's part of, I think, one of the biggest things that I've taken away. If we circle back into your original question there, George, there is such a difference between the word, the label, and the direct experience. And what that Masters did was really allow me to go deeper into the direct experience of the research and live it in a way that traditional academia doesn't allow you to do.
And what that sparks for me, Tabitha, is a shared sentiment that sometimes the labels that are attached to something get in the way of a deeper understanding or an appreciation, and may trigger certain automatic biases or defense mechanisms. I was speaking about the same masters you mentioned to a friend who said it sounds a bit new age, and new age has all sorts of connotations in this Western culture, and there's parallels there with when I first spoke about becoming a coach, and someone said, isn't that a bit woo-woo life coaching? And those words, woo-woo and new age, just go so far to preventing so many people truly understanding the thing. They can act as sort of blockers, and I'm wondering if my experience matches your experience in these disciplines and areas.
Very much so. When I first said, I want to go and see if I can take nature and put earth into business, there was almost this patronising patting on the head of, oh, you want to take the tree-hugging hippie woo-woo stuff. And even the first time somebody called me a hippie, and I thought, I've never thought of myself as a hippie. And what I realised is, you know, you talk about these labels. I mean, I tried to be a hippie and step into that space. And, you know, if you Google me and go back, I think there's some stuff from the days where I called myself the goddess of peace, passion and purpose. And it didn't last very long because it felt so inauthentic. And the labels, the identity that is created that you're talking about stops people from stepping into it. And I've had conversations even with environmental organisations, and they look at me and go, oh, but I'm not going to hug any trees. And I'm like, but I never asked you to hug any trees. Like, and it, you hear people's biases and stereotypes coming up, and even the word spirituality. So a lot of how I've shaped and honed my work has been very mindful of how do I remove as much of potential labels that stop people from having the experiences, because I don't want them to get stuck on the new age woo-woo side of the labels. And for me, that connection to earth is fundamentally really something practical and pragmatic. And practical and pragmatic seems to be almost like the opposite of hippie and woo-woo and new age. So there is a tension to be resolved, and I think it comes back to how do you just make it safe enough for people to have the experiences, so that, going back to Granny, they can have the experience of meditation without knowing it's meditation. They can have the experience of connecting to nature without getting caught up with the labels and the stories. And that is a challenge, I think, that is still going to continue, because I still see resistance even now. And, this is almost a decade later. There's still a stigma attached.
And in your psychological and research and coaching career, have you come across any theories or any data, or have you an assumption as to what's going on neurologically for us when we're hearing something and immediately associating it with something else, and that leading to a bias and an assumption in like what we're speaking about here?
I think the thing that stuck with me, and this goes back to a paper that I read when I was at university doing this master's, and I can't tell you who it was or articulate it. What I found fascinating is that the way that the brain works is that it will create neural pathways. So fundamentally, the neural pathways will play out. So rather than seeing what's in front of you, you're actually responding to the structure of the neural pathway. And that image and that idea of going, wow, so the older the pathways are within the brain, the more liable they are to be activated. And that's the bit that, makes coaching and being able to be present and mindfulness in nature so important, because we're fundamentally having to rewire the patterns that we've already got preconceived. So the more that you've thought about the fact that, hugging a tree is hippie and, caring for nature is stupid, then that's created this neural pathway and this thought process, and it's entrenched in the brain. So you actually have to rewire that. And I think that's what stays with me the most, especially when you combine it with the literature that talks about the capacity to actually be in nature does actually rewire the brain and encourage adaptability. It's like, I once got told I was probably too evangelical about nature, but when you look at the expanding evidence base on the benefits that nature provides for humanity, maybe I've got a reason to be. But imagine that there is something that, we can have in our house, a plant, we can step outside our door, we can access technologically through the internet, because there's data that shows that works. And we can start reprogramming the way that we think to avoid the biases and experience something different from what we're happening now to us rather than in the past.
And, circling back to coaching, the word that really surfaced for me hearing you speak was that of curiosity. And the beautiful idea of approaching something with a beginner's mind. There's something for me about the importance of coaches modeling a sense of not knowing and modeling curiosity, which then hopefully forms its way into the coaching conversation as well. The journey I've been on in the years I've been coaching, I left my coach training very much as a executive coach, capital E, capital C, and I felt a bit bristly about the term life coach, and now I'm very, very comfortable. I've done a lot of work outdoors, and I've sort of broken down my biases and defense mechanisms, where I've sort of ended up very happy calling myself a coach who covers many, many different disciplines, including environmental coaching outdoor coaching, nature coaching, business coaching, and more broadly life coaching, because the more that you study it, a bit like the fallacy of the work-life balance, the more you study it, the more you realize that the two aren't separate, but they are inextricably linked to each other. And I think more and more the same is true of executive and life coaching, that it's very, very hard to truly help someone with their work without exploring the wider journey of their life. And I think it's very hard to perhaps help someone with their wider journey of their life without exploring elements of their work.
I completely agree, and I'm actually smiling here because when I looked again at the labels in coaching, and I got to the stage and I looked at executive coaching and I was like, oh, so executive coaching is just life coaching for people who don't want to call it life coaching and appear more professional. And that moment, because I definitely sometimes have a kind of like underdog, and wait, I need to go and understand all these terms to know what's going on because it's all confusing. And that was just such an aha moment for me. And I think exactly what you've talked about there, everything's connected, and the odds are that if you're having a problem at work, it's probably not always work. It can actually come and have its roots in the home. And how do you deal with what's going on? But you have to look at things in a systemic way. I mean, it goes back to the whole concept of nature. We're not separate from nature. We're not separate from all aspects of our life. We can't compartmentalise work from, family, no matter how much we try to do it. And again, that capacity to even think systemically exists and is enhanced by spending time engaging with the natural world. And we have to approach coaching from that perspective as well and recognise, and that's part of even a transpersonal coaching perspective. It's not just about understanding that work can impact family and vice versa. It's recognising, what's the physical experience, the emotional, the spiritual, the psychological, the nuances of all the different systems or parts of us as human beings, and how do they show up and interplay and interact with what's going on in our life.
I totally agree. And one of the questions that's surfacing for me is this sense that certainly in a lot of the work I do, a lot of the conversations I have speaking to, let's say, a business leader, they would say something along the lines of, I know that I need to meditate and I know that it'll help me, but I don't have time to do it, or I can't be bothered. And there's something very similar about, I know that time in the mountains and time in the woods and going for a run and going for a walk will really help me, but I don't have time. And there seems, certainly in many societies at the moment, there seems this tension between knowing what will restore us and what will be good for us and what will help us with our business decisions and make our work more efficient and make our relationship to the task at hand fresher with renewed vigor and thinking. And yet there seems a reluctance to do the meditation, to carve out time for the run, to carve out time for the walk. So what's going on there with I know this is good for me, but I'm not going to do it anyway, which stops a lot of people spending more time in nature, I believe.
What was coming up as I was listening to you is we learn a lot about behaviour from culture, whether we like it or not. Even, how we treat the natural world as a product, more of culture than biology. The data shows this. And those beliefs, again, are ingrained within us. So we've been brought up in a culture that says, let's prioritise work. Let's focus on doing productive things. And actually, when you go back and even look at going for a walk in nature was something that was considered nature, going back to the 15th, 16th, 17th century, was considered the place for vagabonds and thieves. You didn't go for walks in nature. And then what's happened, and it's actually been amplified, you get the beautiful parts of nature, and the data shows this, that the more wealthy a country is, the better it takes care of the nature around it. On an individual basis, that's true. There's a huge socio-economic gap by even the business leader and the worker in terms of who will go out and engage within the natural world. And there's been this, I would say, almost like this cultural belief that nature is a privilege to go and then spend time out. So we've got all of these beliefs and these stories. And, again, that brainwave state and that thought pattern of being in a place of fear, of stress, of worry and anxiety is incredibly hard to break out of, and somebody can say, well, yeah, I know that I need to go and meditate, but actually it's almost, I use the word demon quite loosely here, but it's almost like there's an energy there holding and saying, no, stay in the fear, because it's a pattern that's comfortable, that's not just in the neural patterns, it's, in the body and the way that people are carrying themselves. So all of this is playing into that fact of, well, I know I need to go and do this, but I'm not doing it, and how do we break that? And that's the point of breaking patterns, creating new neurological pathways, but also creating new habits and challenging the stories that we hold. Because a lot of the time, when you think about even our stories about nature, unless you've looked into it, you've probably never considered that nature was the place of vagabonds and thieves. And actually this idea of nature as a leisure tool that we've got even nowadays is not something that exists even in other cultures. The idea within Europe, North America, that we've got of let's go and spend time in nature and go for the walk. When I've worked with clients in South America or even Dubai, they've turned around and said to me, but it's not safe to go to the park. The park's filled with drug addicts. I'm not going to go for a walk in the woods because, I could get kidnapped or murdered. It's not safe. And I'm really frustrated with having people tell me that I just need to go for a walk in nature because it's not safe. So even what we're talking about now in coaching of getting out there and the business leaders and the executive retreats and the outdoor coaching is still a very westernized notion of how to engage with the natural world. And it's interesting even where the research sits, because how do we coach people from other parts of the world, and I think I've been reflecting a lot of this with, when I was listening to the fact that a lot of outdoor events in France were cancelled because the temperatures were so hot. When the climate makes it unsafe for people to get outside, how do we then create that connection? Because we can't tell them to go for a walk. There has to be alternative means. So again, we're needing to change our thought process. Do we need to go for that walk? Do we need to spend, the literature used to say that, it takes 90 minutes of going for a walk in a natural setting to kind of switch your brain off. Then more research came out and said, no, it's the quality of the focus, i.e. are you mindful in nature and noticing the parts of nature around you, or are you not? So if the literature's saying, right, having a powerful moment of noticing what's happening in nature can be just as effective as that 90 minutes without a conscious awareness, how do we then start changing the information and, the behaviour, and even what we're suggesting as suggesting for our coaching clients and for the leaders who are saying, well, how do I do it? But I don't have 90 minutes to go for a walk. Our understanding is going to continually adapt and evolve because we are having to really rediscover what it means to have a relationship with the natural world and also how to coach with it effectively in a changing climate.
And this is where I want to dive a little deeper, because when we speak about consciousness, I have the image of a spotlight within our mind, and we can choose where that goes. So I noticed the parallel between someone going for a 90-minute walk, but being on the phone on a business call and thinking about emails and work-related stuff, and that not being so helpful as someone sitting indoors, maybe connecting with a memory, like the example you used of your granny, and connecting with the feeling and spirit of an experience using one's powerful imagination. And I would imagine it's possible to have a more restorative experience indoors, meditating or connecting with the spirit and the memories and the experience and the awareness of some sort of natural memory, as it can be going for a walk, but paying no attention to it whatsoever.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that in the literature on mystical experiences that have looked on, mystical experiences or experiences of consciousness out in nature. So I've kind of taken a little bit from your original point, but I'll come back to it. there is a greater impact of actually being in the natural world physically compared to indoors with the memory. However, the power of a memory, when you're consciously focusing on the experience and bringing it back to life, it's building on the research that shows that the brain and the body doesn't know the difference. So if you're saying that in this moment I'm in this natural experience, your body's reliving the experience, so that you're getting something far more impactful and beneficial. Although, as I've said, it doesn't compensate for the fact that there is something that powerful happens when we're physiologically out there. And I think it was interesting going back when I first launched the nature process online, and I would get people, because it was live calls, and I was like, I have to use memories. There's absolutely nothing else to use. And it's something that people have consistently said to me, not just within this program, but even with the coaches that I've trained over the years. There is something unexpected and really powerful about going consciously with that spotlight focus that you talked about back into a memory and reliving that natural experience again, and allowing almost like the imagination to take root, because there's two things that kind of happen for people. And I can use a couple of examples here from client experiences. Either they will go back and they will notice sensory experiences that they haven't noticed, that have been there in the thought process, but they haven't had a chance to process it because of the way that the mind works with sensory experiences. So they'll go back and they'll go, wow, that was more powerful because I really was able to recognise that as I was putting my hands on the bark, and interestingly enough, the one that I'm sharing here, hugging the tree, this person was actually hugging a tree on a weekend retreat. The way that the earth felt beneath my feet and how powerful that was in terms of that connection, and something happened, and giving them a chance to actually verbalise it. They were like, it's more powerful reliving this experience, noticing how powerful it was, and then being able to verbalise it and share it with you. So that's one thing that can happen with people, and that's usually a recent memory, that's still kind of like going through the brain processing systems. And then alternatively, you can have examples like, and this is going back 7 years, because this is something, or 7, 8 longer years, to the nature process online, because somebody had gone back to this moment where they were sitting next to, it was a stone. And they were up in the mountains, and there was actually it was a glacier linked to it wherever they were. And they had gone back to this moment and this experience, and they had asked for a message, and this is the bit that sounds a bit woo, but they'd almost stepped into that relationship where they were like, okay, so what are you telling me and communicating? Again, depending on where your thought process is, this could be imagination, or it could be, you're getting into, does consciousness exist, not just within humans, and I like to stay away from all of the philosophical debates. But something happened when she went back and actually asked for a message from this rock where she was, and she got this message back. And she says, I don't even remember what the message was. She says, I never thought that I could go back to an experience that I'd had and have an even more powerful experience of that experience, because I'd actually gone back and, engaged differently with it. And this also ties in, by the way, with how the brain works, because it's really fascinating to think that every time we think of a memory, we're thinking of the memory. So actually we don't remember the original event. We're just remembering the memory of the memory of the memory of the memory. So then our memories become almost like grounds for imagination that we can play with consciously. And, doing it with this example of how this woman did, to be able to go back and get an insight and a message that gave her an answer to a current challenge that she was experiencing in her life at that moment. That then reinforced the power of the original experience and that experience that she then had within the memory of it.
And it's fascinating stuff, Tabitha. What that sparks for me is the idea, and this is maybe influenced by Viktor Frankl, that we can choose what to focus on. And let's say a classic example might be thinking about the year we've just had. we can focus on all of the bad things that happened, all of the great challenges, all of the suffering we experienced, and tell ourselves that story and reinforce and loop that story. The more we say, I had a really terrible time. But we also have the power and the choice to focus on what we're most proud of, or the really beautiful experiences, or create a different story, which we then remember and reinforce and remember and reinforce. And hearing you speak touches on the really powerful point for me that it seems that at an individual level, we have so much control and choice over what we choose to remember and the stories that we choose to tell ourselves. And yeah, I'm wondering how that's landing with you, that sentiment.
I love the Viktor Frankl quote that you're referring to. I think it's something like between stimulus and response is the gap where anything's possible, and I'm paraphrasing that, but I think it's so true. What story do you want to tell yourself? And it's the confirmation bias. If you're going to say that this was the worst time of my life, you're going to find the evidence. Here you go. This is where it's all. Or what's the different story that you want to say? It is the meaning. It gets back to whether it's the experience of the natural world or experience of our lives, because we are nature, our inner nature. The meaning that we're attaching to the experiences is what dictating it. So if we want to look at the positive, we'll find evidence to make it a positive. It can be challenging. I mean, it's definitely not easy, but bringing it back to coaching, this for me is the power and the potential of coaching as a tool for transformation alongside nature, because nature can create that space. And this is what the nature process was originally about. It was helping to create that space for people to think about it differently, and then coach them through all the reasons why they didn't want to accept that it could be different. And it did, all of my work stemmed from grief, so coming full circle even into the grief of the natural world. Losing somebody that we love is difficult and hard, and there's all sorts of meanings and stories and beliefs that we attach to it. But when we're able to use and explore, like, I'll never be happy again, I'll never be able to have a relationship again, well, what happens if you change that? And what I've found in coaching is it's when you get somebody with a really entrenched belief that says, oh, I'll never marry again, to maybe I could marry again, and then they notice their response to it and they're really uncomfortable. That's really where coaching comes in, of how do we allow people to reframe their experiences into something that helps them reach that, optimize their full potential, and how do we basically, clear out the crap in between, the gap of where they are in that moment and where they want to be in the future. So it goes back to even flipping Viktor Frankl's quote on its head, to basically saying there is a gap between where you are now and the future that you want to create. What will it take? How do you choose to respond, almost?
It's a lovely sentiment. Well, we touched on, we circled back beautifully to coaching, and one of the themes of this series is a sense of conscience. And I'm curious, we've got the space, Tabitha. I know we're both pretty connected to both the ICF, and here we are on the Association for Coaching. I'm just wondering, at a sort of broad level, where you'd like to see the coaching industry mature or stretch or evolve into, with all of your understanding and experience, and where does it need to go in your eyes?
I appreciate that, and I love the fact that you used the word mature, because you really shifted my thinking. I was like, oh, the coaching industry needs disrupted, if you remember the conversation that we had, and you used the word matured, and I thought, no, it needs to mature. And for me, coaching from a perspective of how do we help individuals, it needs to expand wider than just a select few. I think coaching has a capacity to help us more powerfully in groups. It's a way of democratising coaching, because we've traditionally had the coaching seen as something that's only for the high-powered executives. And if the coaching industry is to mature, there is an inexplicable relationship where, rather than thinking that coaching, coaching for the climate or coaching for nature or coaching for the environment is separate. It's actually an integral part of coaching. And I think, from a conscience perspective, if we go back and we look at ethics, what are the ethics behind coaching? Because if truly we are part of nature, then any coach who is coaching a client to achieve outcomes that do not fulfill the Earth's purpose, which is to sustain life on Earth, is that really ethical coaching, especially with the knowledge that we have today? So for me, there's an expansion and an integration and an understanding of what really is the purpose of coaching, and how does it actually support us to exist within the ecosystem that we live in. And I think from some of it, it's also making, I think, some of the assumptions that are held more explicit, in ethics or frameworks. So I'm an ICF trained coach, and their ethics are the ones that I'm more comfortable with. And it's, well, where's the specific reference to the natural world in any of the competencies? It's not there. And how do we just make it a standard so that we don't have to have these conversations? They're just an integral part of what coaching is. And I feel frustrated every time I have conversations that come back to, well, we're talking about this, and yet there's still a focus on performance. And it's like, okay, coaching industry really needs to catch up. If you're sitting there looking at performance without recognising even the concept of the triple bottom line, which is people, planet and profit, and even that as an idea has already been discredited by the guy who came up with that concept. But if you're not looking at the wider ecosystemic issues in terms of performance and almost redefining performance, then can you honestly say, as with full good conscience, that you're working in the best interests of your client? Because if fundamentally, even if an individual person takes action that fundamentally has an impact of not sustaining life on Earth, all they're doing is harming themselves. It's that link between the health and well-being of an individual, a society, a community, and the health and well-being of Earth. And for me, I think there's no separation between the mental health crisis that we have within individuals and the health crisis that we have of Earth. There is a link there, and how do we as coaches and how does the coaching industry really acknowledge that and recognise that and be able to offer coaches the necessary tools to not just mature their practices, but also to evolve them.
So we've got some leaders of the accrediting bodies and coach training organizations out there. What practically and specifically would you like them to change in the coach training and the coach accreditation and in the way that the industry is talking about how we approach coaching?
I think it's a great start that we've had a statement from numerous different coaching bodies about actions or about the climate crisis. It's a very similar statement to what's happening even around net zero and sustainability. We make broad statements, we don't create plans and measure progress and set milestones and goals. How do we bring that into action? And in many ways, it requires time, energy and focus by all of the coaching bodies to truly come together in a space of collaboration to really identify what coaching in the 21st century looks like and redefine their code of ethics and also their coaching competencies in order to reflect this. Now, that's a start. However, from that perspective, you then have to be able to say, well, how do we uphold them? And what is the plan and progression? I mean, is it the fact that coaching industries are going to say, well, if you don't, I would take, for example, looking at legislation in Scotland. If there's legislation in Scotland that says if you don't have a credible carbon reduction plan, you cannot apply for more than £5 million worth of government money for any contract. If you are a publicly listed building, you're going to have a credible carbon reduction plan. That is shifting. If you want any support from Scottish Enterprise, you're actually going to show that you've got a credible carbon reduction plan. They're not just saying a commitment, they're saying what's your credible plan. So there needs to be a collective plan of action that covers coaching in the same approach and allows and makes it easy for coaches to be able to know whether they're taking action. And I mean, I do think we should be going as far in questioning, well, if, even existing in the ICF Code of Ethics just now, if as a coach you are required to do no harm socially, if you consciously choose to engage with a company that is prioritising profits over planet, you are now at this stage unwittingly, or not unwittingly, knowingly violating the Code of Ethics. So how do every single coaching industry, now at this precise moment, make stronger statements of upholding that and standing by that from a place of conscience, as well as creating the bigger vision and the plan of what coaching can do and can contribute moving forward.
And if I can play devil's advocate, what if a coach is brought in to help with change in a company that's doing harm currently to the planet? I guess there's a nuance there in how...
There is a nuance. And I appreciate you making that distinction, because it's definitely not as clear cut as saying I'm not going to work with Shell, for example, because they're a fossil fuel company. Actually, Shell's really the company that needs coaches that can create transformation the most. However, there has to be something in the contracting that it is about that transformation and it's not about business as usual. And for me, that's the nuance that needs to be highlighted there, because I would rather, as a coach, work with Shell and transform them into a renewable energy company, or using, mature forest ecosystem, take the company and adapt it and evolve it like the deadwood it is into the new life that can emerge from a decomposing tree, and I refer to coaches as fungi for that potential. We have the capacity to unlock hidden potential and hidden resources and values in organisations that are decaying. How do we do that? I think we need to be very clear about what are the parameters then of the contracts that we're engaging with in order to do that. But I would love to see more and more coaches agreeing to that, because one of the things that I've seen over the last few years is it's really powerful when people with existing business experience have powerful shifts and change the way that they think, and then have the power and influence to be able to catalyse change. And being able to step into places like that as coaches, we really do have the potential to unlock something powerful. However, there has to be the support. It's kind of almost the thing of how do you step into the organisation and support the organisation without being corrupted by the problems that existed in the first place. But that devil's advocate point is really important, really, really important, because the biggest companies that are potentially doing bad are the ones that need the most transformation. And, if you go and look at it, I think it's the 100 companies, that are responsible for X amount of fossil fuel. Well, those are the companies that we really need to be transforming first. It's great that we've got the smaller companies, but it goes back to looking at it as systemic perspectives. Even in Scotland and the UK, we account for less than 1% of the world's carbon emissions. Really, we're not going to make that much of an impact on a global stage in terms of the results. But what we will be able to do is actually act and say, hey, this is what we can do. Look at the transformation that's already happened. And I think that's the power of coaching. We have to not just be working with the smaller people and, the companies that are already down the path of doing good. It's great. We need to work with the people who are being left behind. Again, it gets back. If the UN is really about leaving nobody behind, well, then in transformation, we have to leave nobody behind as well, as much as we possibly can. Obviously, we can't force people, but they need to come willingly.
Awesome. Yeah, some lovely points in there, Tabitha. I'm in agreement with many of them. We're starting to sort of close off our time together, Tabitha, and there's a word that's been woven throughout our conversation today. And looping back, it might be a label for some of our listeners hearing it, but I wanted to touch on spirituality and where that sits in the work that you do and the work that you've already done.
I think it depends how you define spirituality. For me, spirituality is really about meaning and purpose. It's something internal. It's not external. So, religion has a set of rules. When we go even to New Age, by the way, New Age has a set of rules, and a set of beliefs and a set of behaviours that are valued. The spirituality is the inner relationship. And it goes back to what I said about my granny with meditation. I don't know if spirituality is sometimes a useful word to use. It's there and it's woven and it's embedded, and there is space for those who wish to talk about it explicitly. And how do we give people the experience without the labels so that they can make up their mind for themselves? When people have an experience of meditation or mindfulness, they go, oh, that was really helpful. Then it's like, well, that was mindfulness. Oh, such a big gap. So it really is creating the space for spirituality. And that's what I think. I don't even know if coaching can be separate from spirituality. If coaching is about meaning and purpose and spirituality is about meaning and purpose, then by the very essence of that definition, coaching is a spiritual tool.
Yeah, I love that sentiment. And I'm glad you touched on the fact that spirituality means different things to many different people. And if you were to search it in an internet search engine, you'd see many different and contradicting definitions. And my understanding of it so far has been the connection between ourselves and something greater, whether that's a sort of a religious experience or the natural world. As well, and the fact that we are all made of carbon from stars, and I'm noticing the similarities and differences in how we've both described it, and I think part of my energy is in helping coaching and many more conversations move out away from just the self to the wider experience of existence. And touching on a point from earlier, I think I wonder if sort of traditional Socratic and Western psychology via Freud has focused too much on the individual at the cost of a wider appreciation of society and beyond and nature. So yeah, I wonder if you have anything to say, if that sparked anything for you in hearing me speak.
Quite a few things, and I appreciate the transpersonal definition of spirituality that you've given. There of a connection to something more than the human self, which I can also accept that definition. And I think it's interesting to explore the literature from two perspectives. Of one, even when you look at the elevation of consciousness or vertical development, however you want to label it, within transformational coaching, there is data that shows that you have to have some form of connection to the natural world in order to develop yourself deeper. So you need that connection beyond the sense of separate self. And it gets back to the point that I made earlier about how the fact that how we engage with the natural world is cultural. We've had a form of Socratic questioning that when we were embedded in the natural world, was very different to where we are now, where we've created worlds where, 97% of our time, I think, in the Western world is spent indoors. So we don't have that same intimate, visceral connection with the natural world. And because it was always there, it wasn't spoken about, it was taken for granted. But if you look into any of even the ancient Greek writing, you can see it weaving through the language. And when we take something for granted, we lose it. And that's almost really what I kind of feel about our current crisis. It's simply a process of remembering the reverence that we used to have for the natural world and reigniting that flame within us once again, so that we can restore the state of the world to one of harmony. A lot of R's there.
The image came to my mind of sitting around the fire and connecting with our ancestors far away.
Yeah, or what? I was, can I just say one thing and build on the fire part?
Yeah.
It's not even sitting around the campfire. It's the fact that we used to have fires on top of hills to guide travellers before electricity, and we had fires burning on hills to light the way, and we could see fires burning across the land. I mean, what an amazing experience that would have been against a backdrop of a dark sky. And these are the things that we've taken for granted and lost. And
that we now only see in films like Lord of the Rings when they're
exactly
sold to us as fantasy. Tabitha, we draw our beautiful and far-reaching conversation to a close shortly. For those listeners that want to follow your work and keep in touch, where can you signpost them towards?
So there's two places. One, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can go to www.earthself.org. And we just have a new website that went live yesterday, but on the resource section, you will find links to, I think there's 2 or 3 books there that have coaching exercises, the nature process. There's online guided exercises for the nature process, should you wish to practice it yourself, and very many other things that can help you weave coaching or nature into coaching. So I would urge people to go to the resource section and they will find a smorgasbord of delights.
Thank you. And to our listeners, what would you like to encourage or say to them by way of closing today?
If you haven't already thought about how nature influences your coaching and your coaching practice, then the invitation is simply to start reflecting on it. Potentially maybe with a memory, or simply even by looking around the environment with which you're in and noticing how much nature is there or isn't there. And then to start looking for ways that nature has and is appearing in your coaching conversations, because it's already there. You simply need to become more conscious of it, and by doing that, you're then able to amplify it.
I found myself purring with agreement. Thank you. Tabitha, it's always such a pleasure. I get so much out of our conversations, and I'm very grateful for the time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share thoughts.
This podcast was brought to you by the Association for Coaching. Discover more business and coaching resources, thought leadership, and online learning at associationforcoaching.com.